The Bible has a lot of rules and regulations over a great variety of topics. And the section we're going to enter into now is the one dealing with food and the forbidding of certain animals to be consumed. And even to this day, in modern Israel, we see a lot of these restrictions still being observed by the people there. Even though in the New Testament, we have seen these dietary restrictions being removed. Although we haven't got there yet, so we'll eventually see that when that happens, when we get there. So just hold on a couple more years. Leviticus 11:1. And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, 11:2, say to the Israelites, these are the animals which you may eat among all the beasts that are on the earth. It's a shorter list to look at the things that they can eat than the list of the things they are forbidden from eating, and I think that's why it is written in this way. Leviticus 11:3. Whatever parts the hoof and is cloven-footed and chews the cud, any of these animals you may eat. So when it comes to hooves, we're looking at the foot of the animal and the shape that they have. Some animals, their hoofs, they're in a single piece, and those are not the ones that we're looking at here. We're looking for cloven hoofs. So a cloven hoof is a hoof that is made up of more than one piece. Also known as a cleft hoof, divided hoof, or a split hoof. It is a hoof that is made up of multiple sections, is not just one singular piece. As far as animals with this type of hoof, we got cattle, deer, pigs, antelopes, gazelles, goats, and sheep. And as you see that list there, you're going to see animals that you know are not kosher. For we have the second part about chewing the cud. Now, chewing the cud is when an animal has a special stomach. Well, some of them have special stomachs that will kind of pre-digest things. So they'll eat, they'll bite into the leaves or whatever it is, the grass, they chew, they eat, they swallow, it goes into their stomach, and then it gets kind of processed in there, and then they regurgitate, they throw it up, and then they chew it again a second time because it needs to kind of break down in multiple stages, and that's in essence what chewing the cud is all about. Leviticus 11:4. Nevertheless, these you shall not eat of those that chew the cud or divide the hoof, the camel, because it chews the cud but does not divide the hoof. It is unclean to you. So we have the camel here, singled out by name as an animal that they cannot consume. For the camel's foot, it looks, kind of maybe the right way, but it's not. The camel's foot is a soft foot, and it doesn't really have hoofs at all, and it has some toenails on it, so it is not an animal that can be consumed. Leviticus 11:5. And the coney or rock badger, because it chews the cud but does not divide the hoof, it is unclean to you. I have heard this also described as a hyrax, which I think is the Greek name. It is a shrew mouse, small, thin-set herbivore mammal. Similar to the camel, it chews the cud, but because it does not have the right foot structure and doesn't have the split hooves, it is not good. Leviticus 11:6. And the hare, because it chews the cud, but does not divide the hoof, it is unclean to you. 11:7. And the swine, because it divides the hoof and is cloven-footed, but does not chew the cud, it is unclean to you. So we have the hare, also known as the rabbit, and it is forbidden for it does not have the correct foot structure. The swine is also rejected, and that's probably the most famous animal as far as unclean animals go, the swine, also known as the pig. It's got the right foot, but it doesn't chew the cud, and that's problematic. That's no good, so that's not going to work out. There is a plethora of reasons for why the Israelites were forbidden from eating all of these different animals here. Some of it was for the segregation, the separation, to keep the Israelites separate from the rest of the world so they wouldn't commingle and become corrupted by worldly ideas and try to stay clean that way. Some of it was health and nutrition. So pork is the meat of the swine, also known as the pig. English is great. It's got a lot of weird words. But anyway, if it's consumed, the meat of it's consumed and it's not properly prepared, it's not cooked enough, the risk of parasite or other forms of foodborne illness are quite substantial. And back in those days, thousands of years ago, healthcare was not as good as it was today. We've made some slight improvements since then. So that's probably part of the reason why it was banned. The hair is quite interesting. If you eat a lot of rabbit meat, there's something that you can get called rabbit starvation or protein poisoning. And it has to do with that there's a lot of protein on the rabbit, but it doesn't have much fat. And due to its low amount of fat, it makes the processing of the protein very difficult. There's like a protein overload, and it can be, well, I mean, you can die of it. I guess that's pretty severe. It looks like the hyrax, people do eat them even to this day, but they might be a kind of a tough meat that has to be cooked for a long time to be soft enough. I didn't really see anything too interesting about the hyrax when looking them up. I mean, they look kind of rodent-like, but they're not a rodent. But they could probably still have some of the same infection points as rodents do. Like they carry fleas or something and they could spread disease. It's probably not a good animal to domesticate and have in large numbers. As far as the camel, they can have diseases as well that can be transmitted to humans through either their meat or their milk. So I don't know. It's probably warranted on the safety standpoint to avoid the consumption, especially with technology thousands of years ago, that maybe these weren't the best animals to eat. But maybe there's some other reason, right? You think of the camel, it's like, well, they can haul stuff and carry things, and it might be a useful animal to domesticate and have in their ranks, but maybe by not eating them, it would make it a less desirable animal to have in captivity. Leviticus 11 and 8. Of their flesh you shall not eat, and their carcasses you shall not touch. They are unclean to you. If one were to stumble upon a dead animal and not know the cause of death, or how long it's been there and how long ago it died, it would be very unwise to consume the meat of that animal, and maybe even touching it would be problematic. It'd have to get cleaned up afterwards. Even today, in this modern day, we would not really sanction such a thing, for who knows what killed the animal, and if it's been dead for a while, who knows what kind of toxins or bacteria or whatever other ailments may possibly be transferred to the person that consumes it. So it's very understandable why this is in here. And of course, if the animal wasn't clean when it was living, it's certainly not going to be clean when it's dead. So there you go. And I like how it's like not touching them and not interacting with them. And that makes a lot of sense because, in our modern understanding of germ theory and whatnot, we would know to kind of wash your hands and probably not play around with dead bodies or anything like that to try to avoid sickness. Whereas God doesn't explain germ theory here in the Old Testament. It's just like, well, just don't touch it, right? And I think that's a good answer and a good solution, rather than having a textbook size thing on germ theory. One of the diseases that kind of terrifies me the most is rabies. So if you had an animal that died of rabies and you're touching that and you catch rabies, I mean, you don't really have any symptoms till all of a sudden you get like hydrophobia, you're like afraid of drinking water, and then you're dead, right? Like there's no cure for like rabies. Like even to this day, yeah, we got shots that we can give you before you show symptoms, but like the second you start showing symptoms for rabies, you're done. It's a crazy illness, and it's very easy to catch it. So makes sense. Leviticus 11 and 9. These you may eat of all that are in the waters, Whatever has fins and scales in the waters, in the seas, and in the rivers, these you may eat. 11 and 10. But all that have not fins and scales in the seas and in the rivers, of all the creepy things in the water, and all of the living creatures which are in the water, they are to be considered an abomination and abhorrence to you. So when it comes to fish, we have a dual requirement. We have the scales as well as the fins. A couple fish that would be considered clean would be anchovies, bass, cod, carp, haddock, halibut, mackerel, minnow, salmon, sole. As for the unclean stuff, a lot of shellfish, they don't have scales or fins, and they're crazy, creepy looking creatures, and if they were on land, we would probably call them bugs. But beyond that, stuff like sharks, right? They don't have scales, as well as eels. Eels don't have fins, so there's a whole bunch of stuff that would be considered unclean. A lot of the bigger sea creatures, the one that eat a lot of really small fish, they accumulate large amounts of mercury, and it's typically not a good idea to eat a whole lot of them either. And there's a lot of illnesses that are involved with undercooked or underprepared fish and stuff, and there's parasites and nasties, so maybe there's some sort of health concern as well with the fish, but I really don't know, and I don't know if I know enough to make a case on that. At least not as much as on the land animals that we looked at previously. Leviticus 11. They shall continue to be an abomination to you. You shall not eat of their flesh, but you shall detest their carcasses. 11 and 12. Everything in the waters that has no fins or scales shall be abhorrent and detestable to you. It appears to be reiterating and doubling down and informing that even the dead bodies of these fish and sea creatures are not good to interact with. Leviticus 11 and 13. These you shall have in abomination among the birds. They shall not be eaten, for they are detestable. The eagle, the ostrich, the osprey. 11 and 14. The kite, the whole species of falcon. 11 and 15. Every kind of raven. 11 and 16. The ostrich, the nighthawk, the seagull, every species of hawk. 11 and 17. The owl, the cormorant, the ibis. 11 and 18. The swan, the pelican, the vulture. 11 and 19. The stork, all kinds of heron, the hopi, and the bat. The section here on the birds is quite interesting. Previously, we had a simple rule to determine whether it was clean or unclean, but when it comes to the birds, it's kind of reversed. We just have a list of the different bird species and types that are banned and are considered unclean. So it is different than before. And some of them, they kind of make sense. Like carrion eaters, birds that eat dead flesh. You probably don't want to eat one of those, right? If there's some like rotting animal out in the who knows where and this bird's just there pecking at it, you wouldn't want to catch that bird and eat it. You can just be exposed to all that stuff. There's also a bunch of birds of prey and hunting birds like the eagles and the owls, and if you could catch one of those and it has a rat that it just swallowed whole inside its stomach, right? So that's not really ideal either. So the birds that seem to be kosher are more the ones that eat small things, right? They eat little bugs, or they eat grasses or seeds or whatever, omnivores, I guess. So that's usually mostly what we do here today in the modern contemporary realm as well. In the area I'm in, we got turkey, we got duck, And the one that we see the most often is chicken. And all three of those birds are considered clean. Leviticus 11 and 20. All winged insects that go upon all fours are to be an abomination to you. 11 and 21. Yet of all winged insects that go upon all fours, you may eat those which have legs above their feet, with which to leap on the ground. 11 and 22. Of these you may eat the whole species of locust, of bald locust, of cricket, and of grasshopper. 11 and 23. But all other winged insects which have 4 feet shall be detestable to you. So some of these bugs are available for consumption. They are considered clean. The problem is knowing exactly which bugs these are in particular is quite challenging and difficult. Crickets and grasshoppers. Let's go. Leviticus 11 and 24. And by contact with these you shall become unclean. Whoever touches the carcass of them shall be unclean until the evening. 11 and 25. And whoever carries any part of their carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean until the evening. So this is talking more about those bugs and those that come in contact with them, or they're accidentally carrying them on their clothes. Sometimes that happens, that they will be unclean until the evening. Now, the evening is the beginning of the day. That's how it is in Hebrew. And when we go back to Genesis, it's the evening and the morning of such and such a day, right? It sets the precedence that the days start in the evening and end kind of the opposite of what we do in modern days. So the person would be unclean temporarily, and then they would be clean in the new day. And we got the specification here of washing the clothes and washing the clean up, I guess. And we'll see a lot more on becoming clean after being in contact with these things. Leviticus 11:26. Every beast which parts the hoof but is not cloven-footed, or does not chew the cud, is unclean to you. Everyone who touches them shall be unclean. 11 and 27. And all that go on their paws among all kinds of 4-footed beasts are unclean to you. Whoever touches their carcass shall be unclean until the evening. 11 and 28. And he who carries the carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean until the evening. They are unclean to you. So we have the idea that touching an unclean animal will make somebody unclean. And then beyond that, touching the dead body of said unclean animal will make somebody unclean. And if that person has to carry that animal carcass around, he's got to wash his clothes afterwards from the exposure to the animal. And this is still that temporary uncleanness, unclean until the evening. Makes sense, seems fairly straightforward. Especially the part of touching a carcass. Like, yeah, you could get exposed to something there, so it'd be very important to get cleaned up after that. Leviticus 11:29. These also are unclean to you among the creepy things that multiply greatly and creep upon the ground, the weasel, the mouse, any kind of great lizard. 11 and 30. The gecko, the land crocodile, the lizard, the sand lizard, and the chameleon. 11 and 31. These are unclean to you among all that creep. Whoever touches them when they are dead shall be unclean until the evening. Definitely a list of things that I would not want to interact with. Some of these, we have the weasel and the mouse. I think that would probably also include rats. And in the Middle Ages, rats, they carried fleas that had the bubonic plague, and that's how that all got around and how everybody got sick. So being around those types of animals is not good. And some of these lizards and stuff, they're poisonous. Land crocodiles, well, they'll just rip you to shreds. So they're not really fun to be around. And some other creatures on here. I don't see it right here, but I think frogs and toads are as well, and they often have crazy ailments with them as well. What was it, like E. coli or something that you can get from touching them? I don't know. It's something like that. Something that is not pleasant to get. So they're generally best to be avoided, and probably avoid touching their dead bodies as well. And I guess it would make sense. If you touch it, you gotta wash and get clean, and that's just the way it's gotta be. Leviticus 11:32, and upon whatever they may fall when they are dead, it shall be unclean, whether it is an article of wood or clothing or skin, bottle or sack, any vessel in which work is done, it must be put in water, and it shall be unclean until the evening, so it shall be cleansed. So if the animal is found, or you get this dead animal found, or whatever the other creepy things are, that article of clothing or whatever, it's got to be washed. Or if it's something else, maybe it needs a good soak. Gotta get it clean, get rid of the bacteria and the stuff that's in there. It's crazy how the Bible here, the book of Leviticus, is like 3,000 or 4,000 years ahead of like medicine at the time, with all this stuff being unclean and to make it clean and to wash it, to clean it, before germ theory came out. It's pretty wild. Of course, it would be wild if it was written by people, written by man, but because it's God's law and he kind of spelled it out, and this is what he's explaining, the rules of conventional society do not apply, for he's got insider information. Leviticus 11:33, and every earthen vessel in which any of these creepy things falls, whatever may be in it shall be unclean, and you shall break the vessel. This is quite genius, really. So it's showing that the contamination transfers from the animal into whatever was in this jar or vessel. But then even the jar or vessel needs to be destroyed. And I think it's because it's the earthen vessels that they could just permeate and just be laced with whatever bacteria or ailment that are in these creepy things, and this would be a guaranteed way of preventing exposure. For a lot of these things, it's probably most of the time nothing would happen, but if something did happen, it could be really serious. So it's best just to never have it happen at all. It's being extra cautious. And I think that's what a lot of these rules and regulations are. It's not that every time you eat this thing you'd get sick, or touch that thing you'd get unclean and get sick. It's just that sometimes that's what would happen. And I think of that a lot when it comes to like all this talk of dead animals. And it's like, well, what if it did have rabies, right? And it's like, well, you certainly want to be washing your hands, and it may not be the highest chance that it has some crazy disease, but if it did, you wouldn't want to be exposed to that. So it's just extra caution, for these are big blanket statements and rules that are to be applied to the Israelites throughout their generations over a very long period of time. And they set up a good safety net and safety margin to try to protect the people. God wants to protect his people. He also wants them segregated so that they're not worshiping the idols of all these crazy nations that are around them. And what better way to do that than to prevent them from eating the same food as the people around them? For community comes through food. Leviticus 11:34, of all the food in one of these unclean vessels which may be eaten, that on which such water comes shall be unclean, and all drink that may be drunk from every such vessel shall be unclean. So this section is referring to one of those events where the water or whatever, it got an unclean animal and maybe it wasn't detected or whatever, then they used it with like the food, and then of course everything becomes unclean. Uncleanness spreads in contact with other stuff. The clean becomes unclean. Leviticus 11:35, and everything upon which any part of their carcass fall shall be unclean, whether an oven or pan with a lid or hearth for pots. It shall be broken in pieces. They are unclean and shall be unclean to you. 1136. Yet a spring or a cistern or reservoir of water shall be clean, but whoever touches their carcass shall be unclean. So first we have an unclean animal in contact with some of this cooking gear, some of the stuff that's used for consumption in the preparation of food, and it becomes unclean, and we have the destruction of all those different items and implements, and there you go. But when it comes to the water in a well, so I guess they would probably take the animal out of the well that it probably died in, and then because the well's water is replenished, it's not as big of a deal. They probably boil their water before they drink it anyway, but that's just kind of what they'd have to do to clean things up. And as far as these other cisterns and things, it's, well, maybe they're replenished by rainwater, or maybe they're so large that a small creature falling in and dying wouldn't be the end of the world, and it didn't require the destruction of such an item. Leviticus 11:37. If any part of the carcass falls on a seed which is to be sown, it shall be clean. So we have an animal carcass or creepy thing carcass, whatever it is, touching the seed. It doesn't do anything to the seed. It doesn't wreck the seed. The seed can still be planted. So that's kind of cool. Sounds like one of those edge cases. 11:38. But if any water be put on the seed, and any part of their carcass falls on it, it shall be unclean to you. So the water makes seeds sprout, so if it's wet and it gets exposed, but then it becomes unclean, so maybe the seed would be drawing in some of the animal or something, I don't know. Either way, not clean. Cool story. Leviticus 11:39. If any animal of which you may eat dies unslaughtered, he who touches its carcass shall be unclean until the evening. This makes sense. This is that idea we were looking at before, where you don't eat an animal that dies on its own, that an animal must be slaughtered for it to be valid for consumption, and because it wasn't prepared in the right way, it isn't unclean, so it would make the person unclean. Leviticus 11:40. And he who eats of its carcass ignorantly shall wash his clothes and be unclean until the evening. He also who carries its carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean until the evening. That sounds very reasonable, and it seems like a bit of a mercy to only be unclean until the evening for that one. But sometimes things just kind of happen unintentionally. Leviticus 11:41. And everything that creeps on the ground and multiplies in swarms shall be an abomination. It shall not be eaten. 11:42. Whatever goes on its belly and whatever goes on all fours, or whatever has more than 4 feet among all things that creep on the ground and swarm, you shall not eat, for they are detestable. So we've got some more things here that are forbidden. They weren't on the clean list, so by default they should already be considered forbidden. But because they're being spelled out here, that's just reinforcing the fact. So this would be all your snakes and a lot of those bugs with all those legs. Ugh, hate those things. Probably a lot of other stuff would be included in this as well. Leviticus 11:43. You shall not make yourselves loathsome and abominable by eating any swarming thing that multiplies by swarms. Neither shall you make yourself unclean with them, that you should be defiled by them. The interesting thing about this, with the forbidding of eating these swarming creatures, is that previously when we were looking at some of the bugs, some of the kosher ones, we had like the locust, the grasshopper, and the cricket, and as far as I know, under the right circumstances, those creatures can swarm. So maybe it's certain subspecies, or variants of them that don't and would be considered okay, but it just makes it kind of hard to track down to figure out which bugs would be safe for eating. But because it's consuming bugs, it's not really a high priority. That, and in Romans, we kind of have permission to eat everything for the most part anyway, so it really doesn't matter in the modern contemporary sense. Just a nerd. Leviticus 11:44. For I am the Lord your God, so consecrate yourselves and be holy, for I am holy. Neither defile yourself with any manner of thing that multiplies in large numbers or swarms. 11:45. For I am the Lord who brought you up out of the land of Egypt to be your God. Therefore you shall be holy, for I am holy. 11:46. This is the law of the beast and of the bird and of every living creature that moves in the waters and creeps on the earth and multiplies in large numbers. 11:47. To make a difference, a distinction between the unclean and the clean, and between the animal that they may be eaten and the animal that may not be eaten. So if you were wondering what the purpose of all this was, well, here it is. We have this consecration that God is holy and he wants his people to be holy, and so he set these rules for them to make it so that they can remain holy. And that's kind of cool, to have the discernment from the clean and from the unclean. It's not explained in detail why and what the benefits are. It's just explained that this is what God desires and this is what he has asked of his people, that they follow his rules, because he is their God that led them out of Egypt, and he wants a relationship with them.